Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next is our primary election preview. Who will win the hotly contested Democratic primary for U.S. Senate? Which one of the Republican senatorial candidates claiming to be clones of Larry Hogan will emerge from the pack? Why did the Post endorse a relatively unknown in the Congressional District 4 race over former Lieutenant Governor and a former state's attorney? In the Republican Congressional District 6 primary, which of the Crazy Eights gets to challenge Rip Van Delaney? Will the Prius-driving activists of Silver Spring muster the votes to defeat the total Lexus elites of Bethesda Chevy Chase in the Democratic primary for the Congressional District 8 race? And finally, the county will vote for 3 members of the Montgomery County Board of Education, and nobody will know who they are. Our panel of insiders is going to give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the former Majority Leader of the Maryland House of Delegates, John Hurson, former Membership Directory for the Maryland Republican Party, Phil Bell, former Republican candidate for County Council, Robin Uncapher, and political strategist, Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for 21 This Week, next. Montgomery County voters next week will cast ballots to elect 3 members of the Montgomery County Board of Education. Many not realizing that the Board of Education administers half of the county budget, almost $3.7 billion, and the elected members are virtually unknown. Robin, why does this election draw such little attention?
Well, for one thing, I think it's because the board makes it so inaccessible that people just pretty much give up on it. It's an extremely expensive election to run in. And, you know, because of this, I looked up some of the issues that the people are talking about. They talk about the same issues every time, which is pretty much pandering to the teachers' unions. We have a major problem with heroin in this county, and none of the candidates are talking about it. So I think they've sort of made it sort of a snooze fest, and that's why nobody's paying much attention.
It really is so important. Susan, the same question.
Well, they are totally autonomous. There is no legal way that anybody has any control over them. And I think that the issue is that we no longer have a local newspaper like the Gazette. The Bethesda Beat is doing some coverage, and here at MCM there is some coverage, but nobody cares. I mean, nobody is covering it like they used to. When we had the Journal, the Gazette, there were ongoing articles. They would feature each one, and it's not happening. And only a quarter of the residents have a kid in school, so quite frankly, people don't care.
And to give the final point before we go on to the next topic, I think it's also the county council has no oversight.
They don't.
Over
They are
what they're
totally
doing,
autonomous.
which I think is just mind-blowing that this board would have so much power.
The other thing is the exec doesn't have any control over either.
Well, we'll have to change the charter somehow. All right, in our next topic today, the Washington Post endorsed Joseline Pena Melnick in the Democratic primary race to replace Donna Edwards over Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown and former Lieutenant State's Attorney Glenn Ivey. John, is this a surprise?
Not really. I mean, they had already endorsed her. They had done a major endorsement previous about a month ago. But the point is, I think the Post is really focusing in on something they really care about. And you can see it in the Van Hollen endorsement as well as this endorsement, which is who can get something done in Congress? How are they going to be able to get something done? And this candidate has been pretty effective in Annapolis in getting stuff done, even in her first term. So I think that's where they focused.
But you have 2 other quality candidates. I mean,
They are.
Glenn Ivey was reputed to be a potential county executive.
No, Glenn Ivey's, they're both great candidates. Anthony Brown, Glenn Ivey, they're good candidates, but I think what the Post is really concerned about is how do you get somebody in Congress who can actually start to work the levers of trying to get legislation passed.
And it
because
didn't
nothing's
hurt that
happening.
she's a woman also.
Right. I think that's
Let's
true.
get real. It didn't hurt.
Right.
Why, are women better at these things than men, Susan?
We are better at everything, but I think when you're looking at quality candidates and there is a woman, I think, you know,
And
that.
I think, to take off on that, Susan, I think the fact that they endorsed Chris Van Hollen, you know, and, you know, a white male, they want to go for a female in another jurisdiction.
Well, how nice of them. But let's look at the Republican side. Phil, there's 4 Republicans running in this same primary. Are any of them noteworthy, and who's the likely winner?
First of all, none of them are noteworthy. And that's nothing against them, but they just haven't taken the time to build the kind of name recognition and whatnot. And it's interesting because the 4th does contain some pretty good areas of Anne Arundel County where you have strong Republicans at the state level who could have stepped up, especially now that we don't have state elections in that congressional year. My best guess given this would be Robert Broadus, because he's been involved and a Tea Party guy for so long.
All right, well, we'll wait and see. There's been little attention paid to the Democratic primary in the Congressional District 6 that finally on Friday, the Washington Post ran an article about challenger Tony Puka. Susan, is Congressman John Delaney vulnerable to this challenge?
No, John Delaney is fine. Tony Puka, a nice guy, but he's run for a lot of things and he's never won, and he's not going to win this seat. And actually today or yesterday, you know, I don't think Delaney even thinks of him as an opponent. He's looking forward to the fall and his Republican opponent.
You know, Robin, I moderated 2 separate debates for the Republican candidates that were seeking the congressional seat in District 6, and they're still mad out in Western Maryland. There are 8 people running for this nomination. Amy Homer is probably the most well-known. Is Homer too liberal for Western Maryland and too Republican for Montgomery County?
Well, she does run that moderate risk, but I certainly wouldn't call her a liberal by any stretch of the imagination. She is a conservative who focuses on what I would describe as truly conservative issues like national security. She has real concerns about the government getting too much into people's business, so she sides with Apple in the controversy there. I thought she was a very interesting candidate.
Well, I will tell you from the debates that I moderated, many of the more right of center Republicans were very upset with their social issues and even on gun control. So.
Well, if you're the kind of Republican who spends a lot of time thinking about social issues, that's one thing. But a lot of us worry that some, you know, social issues can look like more like an authoritarian issue than a conservative issue.
Well, is she going to dump any money if she wins the primary? Is she going to?
Well, she may have some money dumped on her if she wins.
Okay, we'll see. Now, there's one final congressional race that we want to talk about. And is there anyone in the DMV, and that's District, Maryland, and Virginia, for those who might not know, that is not aware that David Trone, the owner of Total Wine and Beverage, is running for Congress? Well, somebody must have forgotten to tell the Washington Post, because in its endorsement of Kathleen Matthews for the Democratic primary, the Post gave an attaboy to Maryland State Senator Jamie Raskin, but nary a word about Mr. Trone. John, did the Beatles say it best, money can buy a lot of things, but money can't buy me love?
I will tell you, I mean, it's everybody all over the district, in Montgomery, in Washington, D.C., Virginia, everywhere, is looking at this race and saying, who is this guy spending $20 million and he's going to lose? I mean, that's what's going to happen. And I'm fascinated by the desire of a businessman like this who has great intentions. I mean, I think he's a good man and he's done great things, but you don't just walk into this district and spend $20 million and get yourself elected. I think it's going to be a lesson learned by, I hope, businessmen for certain districts. You know, John Delaney won it in the 6th Congressional District.
And he got it for chump change.
Right, chump change.
Comparison.
But he hits the right notes for the left. He has a noteworthy franchise. How is he different from what's his name down in Virginia that owned the car dealerships and is now a congressman?
I'm just telling you, I think the 8th Congressional District is different.
But Don
And
Beyer,
Don Beyer.
and you also have some very, very qualified candidates
Well, let me
running
go
in
to
that race against him.
But
with some money.
But isn't this the problem? that you do have qualified candidates. You have Jamie Raskin, Kumar Barve, Ana Sol Gutierrez. You've got Will Giwando, who has
Joe
gotten some-
Rubin.
So you have some, but those are activist candidates. Won't they split the vote? And isn't it possible that a Matthews or a
They are.
Trone
I mean,
is
look,
going to
No,
come in?
Matthews
This-
and Trone are
this-
hitting each
this-
other up
this
for
race,
the same votes.
This race is frankly, much to my chagrin, because I support Kumar Barve. Full disclosure, this race is down to 3 people. It's down to Trone, Kathleen Matthews, and Jamie Raskin.
It's
Susan,
been
I'm going
that-
to tell you, of the people that I speak to, I've been surprised how many professionals are willing to talk about their support for David Trone.
Because maybe you're only talking to your neighbors in Potomac. Once he gets out of Potomac, they aren't good. You guys out the white guys in Potomac.
You mean they
stick
can't
together.
vote in Potomac? They're not
The
qualified
3
to vote?
Democrats
They're not
out there.
qualified? They have to be in Silver Spring
No, I'm
to
not
be a
saying
real
that.
Democrat?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
No, what I am saying is that I think Kathleen Matthews and David Trone have much of the same support. The business, white, well-off, a different crowd than the activists, and the activists in 18 and 20, I think a lot more of them will vote. And I think that it's going to come down to, in all honesty, Kathleen Matthews and Jamie Raskin.
But I'll tell you something. I was at polling last night, early voting, covering the poll for the next president of the United States. And,
Hillary Rodham
Hillary
Clinton.
Rodham Clinton.
Yeah.
And there were 25 people there for Jamie Raskin. I'm not kidding. Every place was
where
covered.
were you?
At Silver Spring.
Admittedly, Silver Spring.
But there was no one for Kathleen Matthews. There was no one for
Kumar
David.
Barve?
Yeah.
No one for Kumar Barve. I'm just
I'm
telling you.
surprised.
Are
I'm
we talking about
surprised. I'm
running
really
a table?
surprised. But I want to.
running a table.
We only have 2
May I
minutes.
say one last
No,
thing
'cause I
about
wanna
Trone?
go-
A lot of his people are paid. There is the difference. They're not someone.
Well, you mean they're not from a union? Is
No, they are
okay.
paid workers, and they don't know anybody.
There's nothing wrong with being paid.
There's
No.
nothing
That's
wrong with
okay.
being paid. Susan, I want to go on to Phil here because Phil, there are 5 Republicans that are hoping to run in this election. Is there anyone who's noteworthy and that is going to get the support?
It's a lot of the same thing that happened in the 4th. The one person who really has is you have a pastor, you have a former member of congressional staff, folks that are very good on paper. But the reality is Liz Mattori, by virtue of a little bit of her having been a Democrat and switching, that is what's going to give her the advantage there, since the rest are so unknown.
All right,
Isn't that amazing?
So here's the hypothetical question, and we'll go to break with the hypothetical question. If David Trone wins the nomination, is it possible that Liz Mattori could defeat her in the general election?
Defeat him?
John,
I doubt it.
Phil,
Yes.
Robin,
No idea.
no idea. Susan,
I don't think so.
all right. So when we come back from this short break, we'll examine the Maryland U.S. Senate race, and we'll talk about the presidential primaries and whether it's such a foregone conclusion that John and Susan's candidate will be elected. We'll be right back.
David Trone.
And welcome back. We were counting votes while during the break while you were gone. There are many ways to analyze the two different races for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Barbara Mikulski. It's a race between Old Maryland and New Maryland, a battle between the economic engines of Anne Arundel, Howard, Montgomery, and Prince George's counties to replace the faded luster of Baltimore City. Finally, the 2 primaries have been divisive. They've brought into questions about racial diversity and gender identity. Susan, how do you analyze this hard-fought Democratic primary?
I think it has turned, and Chris Van Hollen, the current District 8 congressman, is going to win. He has worked very hard, and I think the ultimate turning point came when the ads came out and they were a little dishonest on the part of Edwards. Quite frankly, Chris is a better campaigner. He has a better organized, enthusiastic team. I mean, across the state, that's unreal. and Chris is going to ultimately win this race. And the polls are now showing that too. But Chris is not taking one vote for granted.
John, the Baltimore Sun did endorse Chris Van Hollen, but Donna Edwards' base is primarily Baltimore City and parts of Prince George's County. Couldn't there be enough enthusiasm for her? Because she's basically running on two issues. One, that she's a female, and two, that she's African American.
I would disagree with you about her base being in Baltimore City. I think it's divided in the city. Actually, the polls are showing it equally divided in the city. I do think that her argument is about whether or not Maryland, which is a very heavy African American population, doesn't have a U.S. senator that's African American. I think that's a good argument, but I think Chris has done an incredible job at campaigning, not just campaigning. I mean, his whole history and where he's come from, and Susan and I know this better than anybody, being that we're from the district that
we knew him before he became a delegate.
Yeah, right. I mean, I knew Chris when he was elected delegate. So, anyway, I think he's going to win, and obviously he'll be the next U.S. senator from Maryland.
Well, let's not so fast, because we're going to ask Robin about the Republican primary.
Oh.
And there are many running, but the two best-known candidates are Kathy Silesia and Chris Safalis, who are both appealing. Silesia was thought to be the front runner, but the other day, Mr. Safalis got the endorsement from the Baltimore Sun. What's your prediction?
Well, I respect both candidates. I think Safalis I think that Chris, say his last name again. I haven't heard. Yeah, Kafalis is a really interesting candidate, and I think the reason that they endorsed him is because he does focus on the things that bring many Republicans together, regardless of their how they look at various issues. He focuses on basic conservative financial issues, on the kinds of things that bring us together, and I think that's very good.
You know, Phil, there's been some attacks on Mr. Kafalis because he's openly gay, and there are those who criticized him for giving money to Heather Mazur, and suggested that he wasn't even a Maryland resident any longer. But the fact of the matter is, he's young and he's dynamic, and just the kind of candidate your party needs.
Yeah, in some respects, yes. In some respects, no. If the election were only about the D.C. suburbs, he'd absolutely be that candidate. But in addition to donating to Heather Mazur, he's also donated to the Human Rights Campaign and some others that just are pretty unsavory if you're a Republican. So you got to ask yourself,
if you're a Tea Party Republican,
if you're any Republican, and the reality is, Kathy Silesia, she has not only that ability to appeal and with those issues beyond what is divisive, but also she's traditional Maryland. She appeals outside of the D.C. suburbs and inside the suburbs. So that's why I think she's a much better candidate regardless of what happens.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see who wins the primaries, but then again, we'll see if John's prediction will come true in November. After 9 months of it, because if Donna Edwards is the candidate for the Democratic,
it isn't going to happen.
But if Donna Edwards is the candidate, I think there's a whole new ball game. After 9 months of incessant media coverage and debate, is there really anything new to add about the presidential primaries being held next week? John?
No. I don't think there really is anything to add. I mean, Hillary Clinton's ahead by 25 points in the state of Maryland. She's going to win Maryland.
But aren't you taken by the enthusiasm?
Oh, I am. My daughter is a big supporter of Bernie. I asked her, you're a female. Don't you want a female to be the next president of the United States? And she said, oh, we did that diversity thing. We got Obama, and that's done. So I do think it's amazing how well Bernie has done, but I don't think he has always had a problem in states that have a very diverse population. Maryland
with closed primaries, Republicans and independents
yeah, I mean,
can't
he's
vote
just
for him.
had a problem winning these kind of states,
Yep.
and she's piled up the delegates, and I think it's going to happen. The real question is, how does Hillary bring in those people who were Bernie people and bring them into the party and support
And
her?
Bernie's going to be
That's a scary question. How do you answer that, Susan?
The hope is that Bernie would do it, and the hope that the party has is that Elizabeth Warren is going to be the conduit.
I don't think that's
Oh,
going to happen.
that ain't gonna
No,
happen.
I just don't think that's
there's
gonna
only
happen. I
there's only
really
room
don't.
for one star on that stage,
I know.
baby.
No, to go out and work with young people. Elizabeth Warren, that I don't know.
I would
it's
hope so.
interesting. I mean, I
I'll
talked
take
to
money
a
on that
friend.
one.
I talked to a friend at early voting a couple days ago, and she has 2 daughters, one here, one in Maryland, in California. And after Tuesday night, her daughters called her and said, "You were right, Mom," and they're both now supporting Hillary. I think Tuesday night was a deciding factor for women especially. And I think it's, we'll see. But Bernie's going to be in Baltimore on Saturday
about the
night with Ben
Republicans?
Jealous.
Well, what about? Good thing you asked, John. What about the Republicans, Phil? I mean, you're a Trump guy.
I am a Trump guy. I think Trump has done a great job the past few weeks of actually playing the media and doing well, getting the debate to be, hey, votes are being stolen, as opposed to, hey, look at all these victories that Cruz is winning. I've never seen a stretch where somebody could win so much but not actually get to enjoy it because of what the response has been. I think obviously Trump will do well in Maryland. There are a lot of folks here that support him, and he's looking good in the polls. And I think he's going to get to 1237. So it's going to be a very interesting few weeks, but things are moving in the right direction for him. And to Ted Cruz's credit, he's done a very good job of organizing and showing what Republicans really can do, which is why our friends here should be worried about Hillary's coronation.
Robin, what do you think?
Well, he has done a good job of showing what Republicans can do because he's actually a Republican.
You're talking about Cruz, that is.
Cruz. I don't agree with him on many things, but I will say this, he is a Republican, and I think that the concern that people have about Trump is that they simply don't know what he believes. He's changed his mind on a lot of things. I think there's a lot of concern. Has he won a lot? Yes. And if he continues to win and he doesn't get the nomination, I agree with Phil. I think there's going to be a lot of concern. But I have a lot of concern about what he stands
Did you
for.
hear what he said today?
Or whether he stands for
He
anything.
indicated that it was all an act, that he's going to be able to flip the switch and be presidential as soon as he wants to.
Well, he
I
said
mean,
that
That's a
last
little
week,
bit
and he
different,
went
though.
back.
Now, think about what you're looking at. Are there different postures that you have as a candidate or you have as an elected official? Absolutely.
He's
And
coming
there's
across
nothing
as
wrong
a
with saying that.
buffoon and a lot of other words right now.
But what is he going to do? That's this. No one really knows.
Well, we don't know what any of them are going to do. How
Oh,
many
that's
times
not
that's
have we
true.
had
Well,
That's
I think,
not
but
true.
you know what I love
One
about
side
it?
or the
True.
We're, just for grins. I mean, if Hillary's going to win, just for grins, I'd love to see Trump be the candidate, because he'll take it to Hillary and it'll be an interesting race.
But
I am
there's nothing-
scared to death of Donald Trump. Oh my goodness! All due respect for you, Phil. Trump scares the heck out of me. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And now, welcome back. Leading off with parting shots, Susan Heltemes.
As a native Minnesotan, I was devastated yesterday when Prince died. He truly was an icon in the music industry. And I heard a young man say that he reached out to all the subsects of our population in this country and was able to touch them. All I can say is I wish our candidates, and I think Hillary Clinton is doing that, reaching out to the subsects and not breaking us apart. So, Prince, we will miss you. You were truly a wonderful Minnesotan.
Thank you, Susan. Robin Uncapher, your parting shot.
My son, who's 26, called me last week, and he asked me if I had ever seen an election crazier than this one. And I had to reach way back, but it was 1968. There's a great series right now that CNN has on a number of different places where you can stream it, called the 60s and the 70s. And if you think this is the craziest decade or situation we've ever come, and we can't possibly get past it, I invite you to watch the piece about the 68 election and the assassinations and the riots and the craziness, and then the Watergate one.
Thank you. Phil Bell, your parting shot.
Well, this week my parting shot goes out to Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant and also Georgia State Senator Josh McCoon. These are two very hardworking Republicans that never expected to be at the forefront of culture wars, but they've conducted themselves very well. They've fought hard, and they've kept a voice for those who feel that the culture is changing too much, too rapidly.
Thank you, Phil. And John Hurson, take us home.
My shout out is to the Democratic voters in Congressional District 8, because I think they will turn down a candidate who spent $20 million, the most spent in a primary in the United States this year.
Ever.
Ever. And I think that's to their credit. On the other hand, I also want to shout out to Mr. Trone for getting into the race. Hopefully when he loses, he will stick around and be part of the Democratic establishment and pay his dues and run again, because I think he should.
Thank you, John, and I want to thank everybody for being here today. And we're going to take a scorecard to see how well you did in your predictions. And I want to thank the audience, and make sure that you tune in next week to hear our post-election analysis and a perspective on the Freddie Gray case. 1 year later, has anything changed in Baltimore? So for 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken, and remember, you can like us on Facebook, you can follow us on Twitter, and you can watch us on YouTube. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.